Hey everybody, today is a pretty monumental day here in Japan, and I thought I would take a minute just to talk about it a little bit, explain to you kind of what we're seeing here actually in Japan, and kind of elaborate a little bit on just why exactly this whole situation is important. Now, of course, the whole thing is the previous emperor of Japan decided to abdicate. I believe he's like 89 years old, and just said, yeah, I'm getting a little too old to be doing all the official emperor's duties, so I'm going to pass things over to my son, Prince Naruhito, who is 59, but in good shape for a man his age. And an emperor in Japan has not abdicated for like 200 years. So this is a big deal. And one of the things I was watching on the news today was somebody had said that one of the reasons why this is such a special situation is that this is happening. This situation is basically a purely happy event. Before, this would only happen, you would only get a new emperor when the previous emperor died. So the previous emperor is still around. So there's no mourning factored into all of this. This could just be a 100% happy event. Now, Japan has this unique calendar system where they mark eras by reigns of the emperor. Whenever there's a new emperor, the bigwigs at the palace get together and decide, okay, this is going to be the name of this era, and then when that emperor, in most circumstances, dies, then that era name gets to be sort of their posthumous name. So, like when Emperor Hirohito died, after his death, he became officially referred to as Emperor Showa, which is the name of the era during which he was reigning. So when the still alive but now former emperor passes on, he will be referred to posthumously as Emperor Heisei, which is the era that just ended yesterday. So Emperor Naruhito, when his time is up, he will be referred to as Emperor Reiwa, which is the new era's name. And again, this calendar system is utterly unique to Japan, and it's something you see on all official documents. Whenever you're breaking out something that's important or formal, then they will use this system. Another thing that you have to understand here is that Japan has the world's oldest monarchy. It has literally been around for 1,300 years. Now, exactly, the whole situation with like, well, who was the emperor and this and that, and believe you me, there's plenty of politics here all over Japanese history. But nonetheless, that there has been an emperor, that there has been this monarchy going on for, again, 12, 1,300 years. That's that's a pretty big deal. And these days, the emperor has no political authority, but nonetheless has extremely important symbolic authority within Japan. The emperor is, again, a symbol of the country. And while the emperor doesn't, as I said, have any political power, they can kind of use that soft power, that symbolic authority, to kind of give things a little bit of a nudge. Now, of course, it's a delicate balancing act, but nonetheless, if the emperor speaks in favor of something, well, that's about as that's an extremely powerful endorsement here in Japan. Um, the previous emperor, by all accounts, was actually quite a nice fellow. There's an interesting story I read about him that when he was a kid, just after the end of World War II, they brought in this one of his teachers was actually an American woman who was brought in to educate him. He actually learned to speak some English, and she even tried to give him an English nickname, Jimmy. He didn't care for that, but nonetheless, he remained good friends with this American lady for the rest of her life. The current emperor actually was the first member of the Japanese royal family, to study abroad. He studied at Oxford for 2 years. This is going by stuff I've been reading about this today. He even like wrote a paper there. Kind of interesting to know that there's a scientific paper written by the Emperor of Japan floating around out there. And again, by all accounts, the new emperor is a really nice guy. He's known for being very devoted to his wife and very concerned with environmental issues, particularly clean water. Well, I don't think anybody can kind of quibble with him on that. But still, he's he's somebody who has a much more international background than any previous emperor, really. So again, where all this is going to go is certainly up in the air at this moment, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see. And I don't think anybody's going to complain too much if the emperor is going to be using what symbolic authority he has to try and keep Japan's environment good. Now, I got to tell you, I've lived here for a while now, and Japan has some of the most beautiful nature you could ever hope to lay your eyes on. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have some pretty severe and serious environmental issues. Believe you me, it does. So, yeah, not wanting to see some of this just phenomenal nature damaged or destroyed, yeah, I can't imagine that anybody wouldn't really be willing to get behind that unless there was some way money involved. But that's the way of things. Nonetheless, I watched the ceremony on NHK, and they had the presenter, they had a Japanese producer who's kind of familiar with the international scene, an American professor who knows Japanese history, and then there was this American TV personality guy. I've seen him on TV here. He's lived in Japan 20 years, and is fluent in Japanese. And they were all kind of offering up their own commentary on it. And they basically said to the news anchor, she asked them, can you kind of try and put this in context as to why this is such a big deal for Japanese people to our international audience? And the professor and the TV guy basically kind of came up with this. They basically kind of put it like this: is think of it as, one, this is literally the beginning of a new era. That's literally what's happening here. But they also compared it to, in a lot of ways, generations. Like people say, oh, I'm Generation X and you're a baby boomer. Well, here in Japan, people will say things like, oh, you're a Showa person, I'm a Heisei person, like by the Japanese reckoning of things. I'm a Showa person because I was born in 1979 when the Showa emperor was still alive. So it's that's a big part of it. And the professor even put it that this is also kind of a form of soft nationalism. It's not really about trying to say Japan is better than other countries. It's just kind of one of those things that people can look at and go say, like, hey, we've got something really unique going on here. This is something that's a celebration of something that's particularly unique to our culture. And if you think of it from that perspective, it's really kind of hard to blame people from getting really pumped about this. I mean, things that are uniquely American get American people pumped up. So yeah, no surprise here, really. Anyway, I did watch the official coronation ceremony live on NHK this morning, and it's an interesting ceremony. Everybody comes, like, the emperor was the guy, at the time Prince, Naruhito was there, so was his brother, the prince's uncle was there, who for various reasons was not in the line of succession. The prime minister was there, a bunch of important people from the palace, the prime minister's cabinet was there. And Japanese politicians in extremely formal situations favor the white tie look. That's kind of been out of favor under most circumstances in the US for quite a while. They literally have the white tie. Japanese politicians love the white gloves. I mean, seriously, we had local elections here the other week. You would see the politicians driving around town. They were always sticking their hands out the window, waving, wearing these white gloves. And again, that's just sort of how extreme formal dress works in these situations when they're not going to be going for the traditional outfits. But I think this isn't one of those circumstances where they wear the traditional clothes. That's just the simplified version of it. One thing that was interesting that the NHK people noted is that this is the first time ever that a woman was allowed to attend the coronation ceremony. Um, Japan does not allow women to take the throne, which is a little weird if you look at Japanese history, but it is what it is. There is exactly one female member of the Prime Minister's cabinet. It isn't, she was there, but it's interesting to note that she's standing off in the back, literally against the wall, away from everybody else. She doesn't get to stand next to the Prime Minister and the other members of the cabinet. Yeah, well, that is what it is. Still, it is a historical note that she was allowed to attend. A little disappointing that this particular official has, if I remember correctly, been under investigation for corruption charges, but maybe I'm thinking of someone else. But I'm pretty sure I'm not. The ceremony itself was actually really short. I mean, like around 5 minutes. But basically, what happens is the emperor comes in. He stands in front of the chrysanthemum throne, which is actually just like a really high-backed, well-made chair with the chrysanthemum symbol on it. It's not ornate in any way. It's just looks like a very nicely made, fancy dinner chair. And then they bring in two of Japan's three sacred treasures. It's not exactly similar to say that these are the crown jewels of Japan, but they are ancient artifacts that hold enormous symbolic value, and for a long time in Japan held tremendous religious value. Today, it's very specifically spelled out in Japanese law that these relics have no religious authority to them, just tremendous cultural significance. Now, like I said, there are three of them: a jewel, a mirror, and a sword. The mirror is kept in a special shrine, where it's basically not allowed to leave the shrine for complicated reasons. And the sword and the jewel are brought in these wrapped boxes, and they're not taken out. They're just, these wrapped boxes are put in front of the emperor, and there's some bowing, and then it's like, okay, boom, you're emperor. It's interesting that one of the NHK announcers mentioned that nobody has laid eyes on these two, the jewel and the sword. Not even the emperor is allowed to actually look at them. They've just been kept in these boxes for hundreds of years. They have to kind of, like, people here in Japan kind of have to look at these drawings from hundreds and hundreds of years ago that somebody made of a ceremony centuries ago, a emperor's coronation ceremony hundreds of years ago, to have an idea of what these things might look like. But again, not even the Emperor of Japan is allowed to open the boxes and look at these things. And when they're not being used in these ceremonies, they're kept in these shrines where people will go and pray. In a lot of ways, the emperor sort of works a little bit like the pharaohs in ancient Egypt, is that they were meant to be kind of an intermediary between humans and the gods, and were supposed to spend a good chunk of their time performing ceremonies to kind of keep humans and the gods on good terms. It is interesting to note that that one mistake people in America particularly make is that they thought that in the past the Japanese emperors considered themselves to be gods. No, that is incorrect. The Japanese emperors have never claimed to be gods. They claim divine ancestry. Basically, my great-great whatever grandma was the sun goddess Amaterasu. So that's so when Emperor Hirohito renounced divinity after the end of World War II, they basically kind of got away with a little bit of wordplay there. But It's ultimately not something that I think is taken especially seriously these days. I mean, by people here, again, the emperor is just really there to be this symbol of the country, and that's what's really important to people, not stories from and mythology from thousands of years ago. Um, and the most notable thing about this whole ceremony, the coronation, is completely silent. Not one little word is spoken the entire time. All you hear is just like the sounds of people's footsteps. And now, of course, the emperor is like, gave speeches later and talking about this, but during the ceremony, during the ceremony itself, nobody says anything, and it's just held in this very empty room that just has the stage, the chair. The emperor doesn't even sit; he stands the whole time. These two little platforms where they set the sacred treasures, and that's it. It's just basically otherwise this empty room. There's very little pomp and circumstance in all of this. It's enormously, I can't even say somber, it's just enormously aesthetic, I guess is the best word for it. But it is also extraordinarily in keeping with Japanese sensibilities about these sorts of things. And something like this, I mean, I don't know if they broadcast the previous coronation on TV. I believe one of the presenters said that they did, but nonetheless, this is probably something that really only for about the second time in history we've had a proper mass media where stuff like this can really be carried to the entire world. And for its shortness and simplicity, it was still something that was really fascinating to watch. And just think, like, okay, I mean, politically, nothing really changes here. Again, the emperor has no real legal authority. He can just sort of provide symbolic authority, endorsements to various things, and can kind of offer some always very carefully chosen words about various subjects in public. But still, it is really the beginning of a new era here, and the previous era from like 1989 until yesterday saw really huge changes in Japan. Like the economic bubble burst, this social media technological revolution, the internet, and more than a few pretty rough natural disasters, like the Kobe earthquake back in 1995 and the Fukushima earthquake in 2011, and then a couple of years back, the big Kumamoto earthquake here. But still, there is kind of a sense that people here are feeling a lot more optimistic about the future. It's not everybody, and no doubt about it, one way or another, there are some pretty worrying issues that we have to deal with ahead in the future. But still, it's kind of hard, even if you're not Japanese, to not feel that there has been a little bit of a shift in things here in this little corner of the world, and to kind of want to take a moment to say, all right, we've turned a corner. It's a new day. Let's hope the future is brighter. And in a rough time like these days, I certainly can't fault anybody for that feeling. That's certainly a welcome feeling in my book. Anyway, guys, I think I've been at this for about 20 minutes, so I'm going to leave it here. Until next time, take care and have a good one.